Welcome to Crisis in Perception, where we examine the systems shaping our world, one book at a time. So today we're cracking open Occupy, scenes from occupied America. But we're not here to just rehash the same old story of the protests. Instead, we're going to pull back the curtain and look at Occupy Wall Street for what it really was. This massive, live experiment in building a totally new kind of democracy, right from scratch.
When you think of Occupy, what comes to mind? Probably the tents, the headlines, the clashes, right? But what if we've been looking at it all wrong? What if the real question isn't whether it succeeded or failed as a protest, but whether it was something else entirely? Maybe a radical systems test?
To really get this, let's try a different lens. Let's think about Occupy as, well, as a piece of software, specifically an open source operating system. One that was being designed, coded, and tested all at the same time, live, right in the middle of a totally closed corporate system.
Okay, so every good operating system needs its core architecture, right? The very foundation. For Occupy, that was the General Assembly. And no, it wasn't just some big, messy, chaotic meeting. It was the structural blueprint for absolutely everything that followed.
You see, the General Assembly wasn't some top-down command center. The book actually calls it a web of networked organization. A better way to picture it is like a central hub, with all these smaller, independent apps branching off of it. And in this case, those apps were the working groups, the ones doing all the real day-to-day work. And we are not talking about little discussion groups here. These were the nitty-gritty, practical operations of a small city. I mean, think about it. A food group that was feeding more than 1,000 people every single day, a full-on medical team with volunteer nurses and psychologists. You had legal support, a media team, education, heck, even translation groups working in up to 7 different languages. This was a complex, living, breathing social system built literally from the ground up. So if the General Assembly is the architecture, the hardware, if you will, then what was the software code making it all run? Well, that was a process called consensus. Now, the NYC General Assembly's own guidebook describes this in a really interesting way. It says consensus isn't about voting, A versus B. It's a creative thinking process. The goal is to build something new, a proposal that actually works for everyone's vision. The key here is creation, not just selection. This really gets at a fundamental difference. Voting is basically a competition, right? There's a winner and a loser. But consensus, at least in theory, is all about cooperation. The point isn't to beat the other side. It's to find a way to build something that everyone can actually get behind. But here's where it gets really fascinating. Where did this code even come from? Well, the book traces it back to the Quakers. Yeah, really. And for them, consensus isn't just some meeting rule. It's deeply spiritual. It's a practice for finding a higher truth that's bigger than any one person's opinion. One writer in the book even says the process is like a manifestation of the divine. And there it was, this ancient practice, running the nightly meetings in a park in Lower Manhattan. Okay, so we've got our architecture and we've got our code. What's next? You got to run the program, right? You have to test it. And that's exactly what the encampment at Zuccotti Park was. It was the live prototype, the beta test, where this radical new social operating system was fired up for the very first time in the real world. And what happened was pretty incredible. Almost right away, this prototype started to build its own institutions. Suddenly, there were free schools popping up, a library, medical tents, and these food stations that one person described as just remarkable. It became a self-organizing miniature city running on a completely different set of rules. But look, a live test is, well, it's live, and that means real-world problems. Immediately, this prototype was getting stress tested by some of the most difficult questions a society can face. I mean, how do you handle violence when there are no official leaders? How do you make everyone feel included while also keeping everyone safe? These are the core dilemmas of any government, and they were playing out in real time on the concrete. And yet, in the middle of all that chaos, you start to see why this experiment mattered so much. There's this one quote in the book from a woman named Jane who was homeless at Occupy Oakland, and it gets right to the heart of it. She said the encampment, for all its flaws, offered something she couldn't find anywhere else, a place where she had a voice, where people treated her like a real person, a place that gave her dignity. But, this was a beta test. And like any piece of new software, this operating system had a central bug, a deep, fundamental conflict in its design that was, weirdly enough, both its greatest strength and its biggest weakness. And here's the trade-off laid out plain and simple. The Occupy model, this open access system, was amazing for legitimacy. I mean, anyone could show up and have a voice. That's powerful. The flip side is a traditional top-down structure. It might not feel very legitimate to the people at the bottom, but boy, can it make decisions fast. You've got high velocity. So there it is. That's the core tension the system just couldn't solve. The very thing that gave Occupy its power, its radical, beautiful openness, was also what made it incredibly slow and cumbersome. Just think about trying to get hundreds, sometimes thousands of people to agree on really complicated stuff. It takes forever, and time is one thing a protest movement just doesn't have.
Eventually, as we all know, the encampments, those live prototypes, were shut down by force. But this is where our software metaphor is so important. Because think about it. When you shut down a computer program, the source code doesn't just vanish into thin air, does it?
Exactly. The police cleared the parks, the physical spaces were gone, but the ideas, the core critique, that survived. Phrases we all know now, like "we are the 99%, became part of our global vocabulary. You could say the movement's source code got uploaded into the culture itself. And it's still running, right now, in the background, shaping how we all talk about inequality. And that right there brings us full circle. The way most people look back on Occupy is a perfect example of a crisis in perception. It's what happens when we judge something based only on the surface tactic, did they succeed at holding a park, while completely missing the massive radical experiment in institution building that was happening just beneath. So, in the end, the Occupy operating system was a beta. No doubt about it. It was ambitious, it was flawed, but it was also incredibly powerful. It gave us a glimpse of what's possible, and it showed us exactly where the bugs were. Which leaves us with one big lingering question. What will version 2.0 look like? This project is free and publicly accessible. If you'd like to support the time, tools, and research behind Crisis in Perception, you can become a supporter on Patreon. For a longer, audio-based analysis of this topic, see the deep dive linked in the description. If you enjoy this kind of systems-level analysis, please like, subscribe, and comment with books or topics you'd like us to explore next.